My name is Barbara Kerne. I am Professor Emerita from Montgomery College in Rockville, where I taught printmaking and drawing for almost 30 years. We are in my new studio, which I am so excited about. I don't live in this studio, I live right next door to it, but I've always had the ability to get up in the middle of the night and look at what I'm doing, and I still do, so I'm very happy about that. I was born in the Bronx, New York. When I was 8 months old, my parents moved to Brooklyn. The whole family moved. My grandmother and my grandfather, and I have a younger aunt who was born here. So my mother's family came from a small town outside of Kiev. My grandfather was a tailor. His family had a salon there. And I have a great-grandmother who was buried alive, murdered by the Cossacks. That was one of the reasons why they were all leaving. My mother and grandmother and aunt traveled from Ukraine during World War I. My mother never talked about it, but my grandmother used to tell stories, and it was a horrendous trip for them. My father was born here, but the first child born here. They had just come, and they came from Odessa. His father died when he was 7 or 8, and his mother couldn't afford to keep them. So he and his younger brother, by 1 year, was sent to an orphanage in Yonkers. When my father left the orphanage, he went back to the Lower East Side, which is where he had come from, and my father went to Henry Street Settlement. My mother and father met on a blind date, and my father likes to tell the story because they were two couples, and he was supposed to go with the other woman, and he looked at her and he didn't like her, but he liked my mother, and he pulled the other boy over and said, "Let's switch," and so they did. That is how they met. As a child, I had different kinds of experiences that fed my need to be in wild places. I grew up in Sheepshead Bay on Bedford Avenue, about a block from the bay. I would ride my bike along the Shore Parkway. I would be riding by the ocean and the dunes, these huge grasses, nothing there. There was some ponies sometimes, and the water, that was it. In the summertime, my grandmother used to take me to the Catskill Mountains. She used to meet all of her landsmen there, people from Europe who she knew, who didn't live in Brooklyn. They lived all over the place, but they would all go to the Catskills in the summertime, in the woods behind like where we were staying, and the river was there, and there were these huge boulders. So it's like something I've always done. So my aunt, she was like an older sister. She was beautiful and vibrant. In the subways every month, there was a beautiful girl. Her friend Lillian was in Miss Subways, and these young girls, they used to go out and really have a wonderful time, and they used to take me with them. There is a famous story about Frank Sinatra at the Paramount when he first started. My aunt and her girlfriends, they cut school, and they went to the Paramount, and they took me. We get there, and we're going up the Paramount in New York, had like 3 balconies, and we're at the top of the top balcony. And we're walking, and I'm trudging after them, and come on, Barbara, come on. What I hear is Frank Sinatra is there, and he's singing, and the Bobby Soxers, they're saying, "Oh, Frankie." And I'm saying, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? I went to PS 206. It was a typical New York City elementary school. Almost forbidding if you looked at it from the outside. It was there that I saw in kindergarten somebody making pictures and knew I wanted to make pictures, and always made pictures after that. I went to Cunningham Junior High School. It was in that time that we went to Pratt Saturday School. Now Pratt Institute, large art school in downtown Brooklyn. It would have not been easy to get to, except that my father drove us to Pratt Saturday School every Saturday morning. In the 50s, I went to James Madison High School. There was an art program, and you could be an art major. I have 3 small watercolors. They were done inside, so I made the trees up. My teacher knew about the Cezanne show in Manhattan. I had never been to the Metropolitan before then, interestingly enough. I knew how to use the subway system, and I took my whole class to see the Cezanne. I went to Brooklyn College, which is the next step, and I was an art major in Brooklyn College. The two teachers whom I remember best are Ed Reinhardt and Jimmy Ernst. I was studying with the abstract expressionists, but they weren't abstract expressionists then, they were artists making art. I got married in my third year at Brooklyn College. Finished college, had two young children. We all moved here to Washington, D.C., and I was invited to be in the graduate program at University of Maryland. Amongst the other graduate students who were in my program were Bob Stackhouse and Tom Green. The person who was the printmaker, George O'Connell, he said, come into the printmaking studio. I'll teach you how to make prints. So I learned how to make prints with him. And of course, as soon as I made that, screened myself and did that, I fell in love with it. At the University of Maryland, Sidney Gross was my mentor. He was the one who came to my studio one day and said to me, I know you have small children. There's no reason why that should bother you. He said, you're talented, you can do all of this. Bring them to school, it's okay.
Do you remember walking home from school with me?
I did, and then I would go to other friends' houses to eat better food because we didn't have junk food. And my friend down the street had junk food, and I liked that. But yes, I remember the days that, she was at graduate school and we were home alone.
It was really a different time, and we walked home from elementary school, but then there was a period when I was taking care of my sister in the afternoons. I remember initially being resentful about having to make my lunch every day.
My mother had us learn to be very independent at a very young age. I had to learn to do my laundry probably at 10 and do my dishes. She taught me how to cook too.
It just felt like a natural process because she was doing something that was important.
In 1972, I was hired as a full-time faculty member in Montgomery College to teach drawing and silkscreen printmaking. When I was hired, I was asked, who was going to take care of my children? What I discovered when I got to school was that all of these guys that I taught with, they all had young children also. And their wives had 9-to-5 jobs. And so on the holidays or whatever, their kids came to school, my kids came to school.
The day that my mother had me model at school, the model didn't show up. And she knew, and I came to school with her that day, and I modeled for the day.
I used to have people coming to my program who were really good artists. Patricia Underwood had her MFA and came years ago. Her kids were little and she didn't have a press and she wanted to get back into it.
Barbara was an incredible influence because she modeled for me how to be an artist and a mother. She had 2 kids, she was working full-time, she was in her studio producing work. Nobody gives you a manual for how to pull all this off, especially when you're trying to be an artist in the community, show your work, make your work, and juggle the demands of being a mother.
In Washington, D.C., in the early 70s, there was a very small gallery scene. Franz Bader was an immigrant from Germany. He had a gallery and a bookstore in one building, and it was a storefront, really. I had 2 shows with him. After Franz, I went to show with Jane Haslam. Jane Haslam was a print dealer and gallery owner here in Washington, D.C. Barbara Fender, at the time, represented my paintings. After the Jane Haslam Gallery, I showed at Addison Gallery. The last show that I had at Christopher Addison, I met Sigmund Gordon, fell madly in love, and then remarried. We had an interesting and very satisfying life together. Sigmund became ill with Alzheimer's disease. During this whole time when Sid was sick, I couldn't do anything new. But sometimes things happen to you that don't allow you to make big choices. My grandmother told me that you make your life. And so I think my life was like, she could do that. Why can't I do that? I had the opportunity to teach, to show professionally, and to have a home life, raise 2 children.